Hey, Charles here with Rocky Mountain, and today I'm going to show you how to rebuild your cylinder head on your late model CRF450R or CRF450RX. So this is going to be the 2017 and newer cylinder heads. This one came off of 2025 and we blew a head gasket. We need to make some inspections, make sure this thing's not warped. We've got low hours on the bike, so we might not see as much wear on some of the parts as one of you guys watching this video. The more hours on your bike, the more wear you're gonna see, obviously. So with that being said, we're gonna try to keep this simple and help you identify if you just need new valve stem seals or if you need to replace some parts and even bring this to a machine shop. And we're gonna try to show you this without having very many special tools. We're gonna keep it as simple as possible. So with all that said, always refer to your model specific manual throughout the process and take a look at the specs in there. So let's go ahead and get started. To get this done, we have a top end gasket kit from Pro X. It's gonna come with your valve stem seals. You also wanna have assembly lube. We've got options on our website. You also want some contact cleaner. And then for tools, there's things that are nice to have and things that are must have. So the must have things, a valve spring compressor. These are really affordable on our website. And then if you have a magnetized screwdriver, 7mm deep socket, and some needle nose pliers, you're gonna be able to get the entire job done. However, there are some things that are nice to have. So micrometer, small hole bore gauge, digital calipers, a straight edge, feeler gauges, things like that. Those are nice to have, and they're gonna give you reassurance based on what you see visually. You can verify whether parts are good or bad. Other than that, I'm gonna use some Prussian blue to take a look at a contact pattern. This is just machinist dye. You could use a Sharpie instead if you want. Now, if you need parts for your top end, you need lubricants, cleaners, things like that, or even some special tools, you can find those things on our website by clicking the link in the description below. Now, before we go too far, I do want to point out a couple more items that aren't absolutely essential, but I recommend having. So right here, we've got some solvent to help test our valves. And then we also want to make sure our keepers are fully seated when we go back together. So we're using a punch, a hammer, and some blocks of wood for that. Now we also have safety glasses. Anytime you're dealing with chemicals, you want to be wearing rubber gloves, and we also have some rags. I'm going to start out with a solvent test. This is going to verify my results from my leak down test. Just gonna pour some solvent down the intake tract. We're gonna let it sit for about a minute and check for leaks. You can see this is leaking right away, so we know we have issues with the intake valves sealing. Now for disassembly, what we're gonna do is take our valve spring compressor. You need to select the correct size adapter for the spring retainer. We're going to slightly compress the spring. And with this, sometimes the spring retainer can stick to the keepers, so you'll need to lightly tap the end of the tool with a hammer to free things up. Then use a magnetized screwdriver to remove the keepers, back off the spring compressor, and remove the spring retainer and spring. As you disassemble, it's important to keep all the parts for each valve grouped together and organized. And we'll start to remove each valve. So as I pull these out, I'm just gonna pull it up a little bit and rock it side to side, top and bottom. If you feel more play one way than another, that's gonna indicate some wear in your valve guide. Then we can repeat those steps for the remaining valves. After that, I'm gonna use some needle nose pliers and remove each of the valve stem seals. And then you wanna use a magnet or some pliers to remove those spring seats. Next, I'm gonna remove this intake boot. And don't forget to remove your exhaust gasket. To clean our parts, we'll be using some contact cleaner. Then for the carbon in the cylinder head, the best way to clean that up would be with a soda blaster, but since most people aren't gonna have that, you can use some carbon remover or even some oven cleaner. But if you do that, you wanna use some caution, read the directions, and only let those chemicals stay on the parts for a short period of time to avoid damaging anything. All right, now that we have everything cleaned up, we need to make some inspections. And again, we're gonna try to make this as simple as possible. That way you know whether or not you need to bring this to the machine shop or if you need to buy a completely new head. So with that said, some common fail points are with the valve seat, the valve face itself, and our valve guide. So with that being said, we had some leakage past both of our intake valves. And when we were inspecting this, once we had everything apart, we saw that we actually had some carbon buildup on the seat itself that was holding our valves open just a little bit and preventing them from sealing. And we know this bike, it for sure got hot, and we know that it was close to the rev limiter for long periods of time. So I'm not super surprised that we had some carbon buildup right there. Now, with that said, if you're not sure if these are good or bad, typically these are gonna have a 3-angle cut. So the middle cut, that's gonna be a 45-degree angle. And you're gonna wanna look at that surface, and you're gonna wanna make sure you check it for carbon buildup. You're gonna look for pitting or any other damage to it. You're also gonna look at your valve face. It should be a straight surface all the way across. If it's cupped out, you know it's worn, and it's worn through that protective coating and into the valve itself, meaning it needs to be replaced. Now, if you're not sure whether or not these parts are good or bad, if you did have something leaking like ours, one check you can make is you can get some Prussian blue, or you can use a Sharpie. And we're gonna use this. You can put this on the valve seat or on the valve face. I'm just going right on the valve face. Gonna have a nice even coating here. And all this stuff it's a machinist dye. And with this on here, it's gonna show us the pattern of where this is actually sealing. So you're gonna install the valve into the cylinder head. And if you're using a Sharpie, you might have to rotate the valve a little bit to see where the wear pattern is. But if you have the Prussian blue, this is the best way to do it. And we're just gonna push the valve straight up and down a couple times. And that's gonna give us our contact pattern. And we're gonna look at both the valve face and the valve seat, and that's gonna let us know what's going on. So on the seat, what you're looking for, you can see where that die got pushed out. So the thinner spot, that's where the valve is actually sealing. And you wanna make sure that is a nice even ring all the way around. If you see anywhere that the pattern disappears, or if you didn't get any dye transfer, you may wanna double check, make sure you had enough dye on the valve itself. But if anything is uneven, that's when you're gonna wanna be reconditioning the valves. You can also measure that valve seat width, or the part that actually seals. So the spec on this intake valve is 1.1 to 1.3 millimeters. So as long as you're within that spec, you're good to go. You can also double check the valve. We've got a nice even pattern all the way around. So this one's good to go. You can repeat those same steps for the remaining valves. Keep in mind the seat width is going to be different for the exhaust. The next common fail point is with the valve guide. So with these, I have noticed more exhaust valve guides going bad than intake. I'm not saying that's the rule, that's just something I've noticed. And we already mentioned, as you take the head apart, you're gonna see how much play they have, both top to bottom, side to side, and sometimes you can feel if there's more wear one way than another. Now, they do need to rock just a little bit. You do need some clearance between the valve stem and the valve guide for some oil to be in there, but when it becomes excessive, that's when you have issues. Now, besides the feel method, you can take some measurements if you're not quite sure if it's bad or not. So if you have a micrometer and small hole bore gauge, you can measure the valve stem and then also use the small hole bore gauge in that guide and take those measurements, see if the clearance is correct. Now, when these guides wear, they kind of have an hourglass shape to them. So they're going to get more wear on the end. So make sure you take a measurement that's somewhat close to the end, compare that to the stem, and make sure it's still in spec. If it's not and you need to replace these, you're going to want to replace not only the valves, but you need to get these valve seats machined as well. Now, one tip with this, the fastest way to check this is set the small hole bore gauge to the service limit and then see if it fits into any of your valve guides. If it does, then you know you're out of spec and need to replace them. The next thing you want to check is to make sure your cylinder head is not warped. Now, most of the time when you're going in to do a top end, you might not need to check this, but we had a head gasket that was blown. So this is super important to us, and I actually already resurfaced this head. It was a little warped. Now the service limit is 4/1000ths of an inch. We found that we had 1.5 thousandths of an inch warpage, and we had a loose cylinder head bolt. It just wasn't as tight or torqued to the same spec as the rest for whatever reason. So I believe it was the bolt causing the head gasket to leak, and I don't think it was actual warpage from the head, but we got it resurfaced. We're straight. And you know, if you're close to 4/1000ths of an inch, to me that seems like a lot, and I would be getting it resurfaced. Ideally, you don't have any warpage. And how you check that is with a straight edge and a feeler gauge. So I'm just using, this is just over 1/1000ths of an inch. You're just going to use the straight edge along all the edges, and then ideally you'd be going diagonal as well. So as you can see, this cylinder head is looking good, and to make these checks, we're just using parallels. You can find these pretty much anywhere, but we just need to make sure we have a nice machined edge that is perfectly flat, and that's going to allow us to make those checks. Now for the rest of the parts, a lot of this is just going to be a visual inspection. Again, there are measurements you can take, they're outlined in the manual, but the main point here is to visually identify any issues and get them replaced if there are problems. So we're going to look at these pads on the finger followers or the rocker arms. So with these, we're looking for any signs of wear on this pad right here. There's a little piece on the bottom as well. Take a look at that. If you see a flat spot worn in there, then obviously you know this thing is worn and needs to be replaced. You also want to look at the shaft that these ride on. So you can see where these normally ride, but we don't have grooves that catch my fingernail into the shaft. If this has worn, if the follower has worn grooves in there, you know that both pieces need to be replaced. Now moving on to the cam, we have an auto decompressor. So to check this, just want to press out on it, make sure it returns on its own. Take a look at the plunger, make sure that's going in and out. That's looking good. We've got this bearing here. I'm just going to spin it by hand, make sure it rolls nice and free. So that one's looking good. And then take a look at the cam lobes. So we're just making sure these aren't worn down. And if they are, you should see some material kind of building up on the sides. But these are looking good. We also have another bearing. We're going to inspect it the same way. And you can see this one, it looks like it's gotten hot at some point in time, but still rolling smooth. Over here, we're going to be looking at these rocker arms. So these have rollers on them, and the main thing with the rollers is we're going to make sure they don't have play up and down. So that's nice and tight. Obviously it can move side to side just a little bit. This one's nice and tight as well. It rolls smooth. We also have these little pads on the ends. Those are looking good. If they look like they're flattened out or it's getting some wear in there, make sure you get them replaced. And then it's the same thing on the shaft. We're just making sure we don't have any deep grooves, making sure the shaft isn't worn out. All right, now for the cam cap. We've got some cam bearings riding inside of here. And you can see we actually have some marks where this outer race, it's rotated in here, which shouldn't happen under normal conditions, but I think the cylinder head just got so hot that when it did overheat, I think the aluminum expanded just a little bit more and let that rotate in there a little bit. Now, with these marks, it's nothing I can really feel with my fingernail. If it was something where it was deep grooves and this spun a lot, I would definitely want to replace the cylinder head, and it's going to come with this new cam cap at the same time. But in this scenario where we can't really feel any wear on here and we can just kind of see a couple marks, we're going to reuse the head. Now with this bearing, it's actually really inexpensive to replace on the outer one. So I'm going to replace this one. The inner bearing on the cam, you can only get it with the cam shaft, and it's a little more expensive. That one's looking good, so we're actually going to reuse it. Now, the last thing I want to say about these bearings, we know we're going to be checking our valves on a regular basis. So we're going to inspect this and make sure that these bearings haven't spun again. But if you're not going back in here anytime soon and you want to make sure you don't have any issues, definitely get anything that's questionable replaced. Now, one of the last things I want to mention that you should inspect anytime you're going into this head is make sure the oil passageways are free and clear. So we've got an oil feeder that goes into this cam cap, and this cam cap then pulls it over to these oiling holes over here. So make sure that's all free and clear so everything stays running smooth. Now for assembly, we want to make sure everything is nice and lubed up. This spray-on assembly lube is one of my favorites just because it's quick and easy. Now for the valve stems, I like to use this squeeze bottle. It's a little bit thicker. It's going to stay in place. We'll put a drop of lube down the valve guides as well. And then this next step is really important. It's easy to forget. You need to install the spring seats next. So make sure you install everything to the corresponding guide that you removed those parts from. So at this point, I'm ready to use my 7mm socket. I am using a little bit of assembly grease. This grease is designed to dissolve in the oil. And I'm just gonna pick up a seal with that grease. All 4 seals are the same. And we'll just pop each one into place. And you should be able to hear these click into place. You can also feel it, but it's not a bad idea to make a visual inspection. Just make sure the seal is all the way down. All right, so now I'm ready to install the valves. So I'm gonna start with that left exhaust valve. And if you got any extra assembly lube on the face, you can wipe it off. And then for the spring, the tight coils will be next to the cylinder head, and the paint is going to be facing up. And that paint can be at different colors depending on the year of your bike. And we've got our retainer, and now we can compress the spring. Then we've got our magnetic tip screwdriver. We're going to install the keepers with this. You can use a little bit of assembly grease on a screwdriver to help out as well. And just keep in mind the taper, the thin side is going to be facing the cylinder head, thicker side towards the top. There's that ring in the top that's going to sit in the groove of the valve. And then as I back this spring compressor off, I'm making sure the keepers are fully seated in the valve keeper grooves on the valve. Then from here we can remove the spring compressor and do those same steps on the remaining valves. Now with the valves installed, it's really important to make sure the keepers are seated in that groove on the valve. So one thing you can do to make sure everything is seated is get a couple blocks of wood, raise the cylinder head off your workbench, and then make sure nothing is covering your valves underneath or keeping them from opening up. Then I'm gonna take a punch, I'm gonna put it on the end of the valve, and I'm just gonna tap each one. That's just going to help make sure everything is fully seated and, help ensure these keepers are in place. So that's it for rebuilding the cylinder head on your late model CRF450R or RX. If you need to know how to get this back on your bike, make sure you check out our other videos. We've got a top end rebuild on this 2025 that you're going to want to check out. Now, with that said, if you need any parts for your bike, you can find that stuff on our website. Just click the link in the description below. We offer free shipping on orders over $75. And hey, if you have any questions about any of this stuff, leave those down in the comments and we'll catch you guys in the next video. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.